guess you could turn the feed on until we're starting. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا الا ما علمتنا. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Brother Samir Hashmi. I'll be the MC for tonight's program. First, we'll have some Quranic recitation by Hafiz Ahmad Sagir, and then Nihal will give a short speech for about 10 to 15 minutes. And from that point on, we want to have more of a conversation style format. So on my right, the phone number is projected on the wall. You may text your questions to that number, and I'll be asking them to Nihal, inshallah. So we'll start with Quranic recitation.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أم تسألهم أجرا فهم من مغرم مثقلون أم عندهم الغيب فهم يكتبون أم يريدون كيدا فالذين كفروا هم المكيدون أم لهم إله غير الله سبحان الله عما يشركون وإن يروا كسفا من السماء ساقطا يقولوا سحاب مركون فذرهم حتى يلاقوا يومهم الذي فيه يصعقون يوم لا يغني عنهم كيدهم شيئا ولا هم ينصرون وإن للذين ظلموا عذابا دون ذلك ولكن أكثرهم لا يعلمون واصبر لحكم ربك فإنك بأعيننا وسبح بحمد ربك حين تقوم ومن الليل فسبحه وإدبار النجوم صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah khair, Ahmed, for that beautiful recitation. I will now introduce Nihal. MashaAllah, his credentials have grown so much that I need to read them off my phone. So Nihal Khan is a PhD student at Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul, Turkey. He is a founder for Quran for Professionals and an instructor at Fawakih Institute. He received an Alamiya degree from Nadlat al-Ulama in Lucknow, India, a master's in religious studies from the Hartford Seminary, and he holds a BA in psychology from Montclair State University. So without further ado, Nihal.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله النبي الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته everyone. Jazakallah khair for coming out on a pretty humid, I think during the day the weather was a lot nicer, and now it's gotten to like that humid level. I was just in Atlanta before this, and the humidity in Atlanta was like very high. They call it Hot Atlanta for a reason. But weather changes, and sometimes that leads us to different phases in life. And change is an indication of how we make decisions as well. And that's something that, inshallah, if you come to tomorrow's course, we'll talk about the fact that when things change, it indicates that there's a creator. In Arabic, it's called taghayyur. So when something changes, so for example, when the seasons change, it indicates to the fact that there is a being that is changing it, right? Like the seasons, winter, spring, summer, fall. Winter is not an animate thing that says, hey, I'm done, April's here or May's here and I'm leaving, right? Or the seasons don't decide that themselves. That change occurs because another being decides that it's going to occur. Now, what is it that I want to speak to you all about? There's a couple of points that I'm going to speak of. As Samir said, I don't want to necessarily give a lecture for the sake of giving a lecture. When I was an imam in the Hartford, Connecticut community for the last few years, the thing we stopped doing was giving lectures. Mainly, number one, because I don't like giving lectures. And number two, I think a lot of folks are just done with listening to lectures. And I think what the COVID era taught us is that Muslim community spaces, if they're doing what YouTube's already doing, then what's the actual value of the space that you're in? So I think discussion, as it ought to be, and kind of having an open floor is a better idea and a better way to structure community programs. So there's a couple of points I'm going to mention. I'm just going to mention 5 points, hopefully in the next 10 to 15 minutes. And then me and Samir will have an open conversation, and then we'll field questions from you all. So the questions could be texted to the number there, but you can also just raise your hand and ask the question. There's no issue with that. So there's a couple of issues to keep in mind. I brought up some of these things in the khutbah today. So like number one, right, somebody becomes Muslim. We often are very happy by the fact that they become Muslim. And in the initial phases of them saying their kalima, saying La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, what tends to often happen is that little to no one follows up with that individual to see whether he or she is doing well in their adaptation of their new faith, right? So you have that issue that comes up. Now, all the while, it looks nice to talk about how many people are coming into the fold of Islam. But similarly, research shows that as many people that enter the fold of Islam, we have a similar, if not same number of people that are leaving through the back end outside of Islam. And the Pew study that went over it, I actually wanted to discuss some of the data that they had collected in this study. So it showcases that within the United States, right, in most of the United States, you have a country that is or was relatively Christian, right? And because of many historical events, one of them being the Civil War, a lot of people stopped practicing their faith. What does the Civil War have to do with you stopping to practice your faith? Well, on one side of the aisle, there was someone or one group saying that it is a God-centered reality that we have been endowed this state, slavery is okay and whatnot, and this is from God. On the other end, that was not the case. So when that occurred in the antebellum period, in the period after the Civil War in the United States, religion began to take a very downward spiral in this country. Not because of any conspiracy theory, but because of the fact that religion was wrongfully weaponized. That's what it comes down to. Now, keeping that in mind, is that the reason people leave Islam? No. Like I said, people come to Islam, but you have a lot of folks who leave Islam. But what's the reasoning for that? According to that Pew study, they said, number one, a lot of folks have an issue with the idea of organized religion. Now, what does that mean? That means that folks either tend to not understand their religion, or number two, folks say that we want to live our life in a way which Islam is not okay with, which, as I mentioned earlier as well, would be more of an emotional response to wanting to leave Islam, which in my estimation is not that big of a danger as opposed to someone who makes an intellectual and conscious decision to say that this faith does not make any sense, this faith is contradicting science, this faith contradicts history, this faith contradicts morals, this faith contradicts, the modern land that we live in, all the ethos that exist, and say that's why I'm going to walk away. Now, there's a big difference between both of them. Now, the second reason that a lot of folks walk away from Islam, according to the study, is that they don't believe in God. right? You can read the study for yourself. All you have to do is Google something like Pew Study 2018 Muslims Leaving Islam. Now, it sounds weird. It sounds weird that we don't believe in God, so we're leaving Islam. Is the notion of not believing in God only a Muslim problem? Do Christians say they believe in a God? Do Jews say they believe in a God? Do other religions, if they don't call it God, they'll say that we believe in a higher power, an entity, whatever they call it. Right? It's actually a very common idea to many different religions. But within Islam, when we say that people are leaving Islam because they don't believe in God, the actual thing is that they haven't understood who God is in Islam. Like, if I talk to you about God, what does that mean in Islam? What do you think? Just by a raise of hands. Who is God in Islam? Right? Allah, right? We know who Allah is, but how do we actually define who Allah is? Right? Yeah, go ahead. He's a creator, sure, right? But what if I'm talking about God and there's somebody in the room that is a believer in the Greek gods and goddesses? Am I going to have the same exact idea of God that they are going to have? No. So as a Muslim, one aspect is that I believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? He exists, right? And not only that, He necessarily exists. He has to exist. Not because I'm just saying He has to, but because of the fact that there is a world around us, creation is there, it begets the question. Thank you. It begets the question that who created the world around us? Who created me? Who created you? Right? Which now begs into the second point that I wanted to bring up, right? Is that when it comes to belief is not something that purely originates from within me. Like, I don't just wake up one day and say that I believe. Rather, what happens is that the society that I live in, it molds me. The society that I interact with places ideas in my head. When you open up a science textbook, right, if I ask you, what is the universe? You'll often see a definition saying something to the extent of like, the universe is all the planets, all the stars, all matter, right? But for us as Muslims, actually, in Arabic, what we call the universe is the alam, right? Not to confuse it with the Urdu word, the alam. The alam in Urdu is just the earth. But in Arabic, it refers to the entirety of the universe. And more so, within the science of Aqidah, it's classified as ma siwallah, right? Everything, kullu ma siwallah, everything that is besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is creation. Everything besides Him. So all of it goes back to understanding our beliefs. Number two, right, is that coming to full certainty. In the Quran, Allah says, وَاعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ, that worship your Lord until certainty comes to you. What is certainty? Right? Because many people live life with a question deep down inside, or are perturbed deep down inside because they have not actually investigated the claims of their religion, of their faith, of Islam in totality. And we are all obliged to take an initiative to study our faith and conclude individually that this thing that I follow, these beliefs that I have, is 100% true. And there are always going to be doubts, right? And doubts show you that you have faith. It's indicative of the fact that you have Iman. But at the same time, if something showcases that you have something, you need to protect it, right? You need to root those doubts out. Deep down inside, do I really 110% believe that there is a creator of this universe? I need to come to terms with that. Number two, do I, without a doubt, understand and believe that there is an akhirah? I have to 110% come to the conclusion of that. Do I, within my heart, completely understand and believe that I am going to die and there is a realm that is beyond this one? All of those beliefs will come into play once I begin to investigate and scrutinize what it is that I actually believe about my Lord. Number 3, intentional spiritual growth is rooted in a love of questioning. Intentional spiritual growth is rooted in a love of questioning my faith. I mentioned today in the Jum'ah khutbah the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ, and recall when Abraham said to his Lord, Rabbi arini kayfa tuhyi al-mawta. Oh Allah, show me how it is that you raise the dead, or rather you raise the dead to life. Is he questioning Allah? Right? He's asking Allah, how do you do it? And Allah asks him, أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ? You don't believe? Do you not believe? And again, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does something, He doesn't have a motive, right? Like there isn't an outside motive making Allah do something. When me and you do something, if I open this bottle, right? Why am I doing that? Why am I opening this bottle? To drink. Okay, so now I'm going to drink. What was my motive for drinking? To quench my thirst. Every human being, when they do an action, they have a motive. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have motives. You see what I'm saying? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does what He wills because He's the creator, right? He does what He wills because He's the creator. But now coming back to this point, that when we question, we do it for a reason, which is to come to terms with the fact that I believe Islam is the truth. I believe and understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a wisdom to everything, but that doesn't mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing it to benefit Himself. No, that's not why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does what He does. And not only that, keeping in mind, just by a raise of hands, how many of you know someone that has opened up to you, or you know of it third hand or second hand, somebody who said that I'm not too sure about whether Islam is truly the truth, and they were raised in the faith? Raise your hands. Right? So it's a significant number of people. It's a significant number of people. And it doesn't just affect young people. Somebody may ask that why is it that there's a generation that does not really go into delving into and questioning the existence of God? Why is it that they don't do that? Like, for example, there's a very famous story by Fakhruddin al-Razi, who was a famous scholar, and he was in a town visiting, and there were a whole ton of people clamoring around him, and people were rushing to him, and somebody asked, an old woman asked that, who is this person? Right? Why is everyone clamoring around him? And they said that it's Fakhruddin al-Razi, and he wrote 1,000 proofs for the existence of God. And her only response was, then he must have had 1,000 doubts. Right? Belief was simpler once upon a time. Now, what is the reason that people tend to go away from Islam? Like, one thing you'll see is that in many Muslim countries, this isn't a constant, like, oh, should I believe in God? Is Islam true? But often it occurs in a space or in a place where Islam is not the norm. Right? Islam is not the norm where we live in currently. That's the first thing to keep in mind. As involved as we want to get into politics and get people into Congress, just understand that the time and place that you live in is a place where you need to safeguard your faith, not at a political and at a holistic level. That's later. If you want to get into that, that's fine. But what matters is having faith be homegrown. Right? When we work with people locally, and we tend to go away from that, we end up having these big campaigns and whatnot, which I'll get into in a moment. Right? But it's about having faith homegrown. And once upon a time, there existed an era in which there was no colonization, in which the idea of everything being material, like you open your science textbook, right? Everything is material. Everything is composed of matter. Everything is composed of atoms, right? Everything is governed by laws, right? But there are assumptions in those ideas that don't take into account other things. There are assumptions, for example, if I'm driving down the road and I'm a safe driver and I've never gotten a ticket and I've never been stopped, can I say with 100% certainty that nothing will ever happen to me, that I will never be subject to police brutality, I will never be subject to getting a ticket, I will never be subject to an accident? Can I say that? No, right? So when it often comes to modern science, they observe things like that. That because something has not happened, then something will not happen. But because something has not happened, can I, without a doubt, say that it will not happen? No. Right? So for example, somebody says, I don't believe in God, I haven't seen him, therefore God doesn't exist. Does that make sense? And when I say does it make sense, can you logically follow that pattern of thinking? I haven't seen something, and since I haven't seen it, it doesn't exist. But is there, let's take that for what it is. If you haven't seen God, you're saying he doesn't exist. But is there very much so a possibility that he does exist, and you not having seen him doesn't actually mean anything? Is that a possibility? Logically speaking, right? Like logically speaking. Right? All of that comes down to following logic. And I'll sum it up in this. For me as a Muslim, number one, we follow the proofs of the mind. Right? We follow how does the mind lead us to understand who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Number two, we follow revelation. If we have see, that was supposed to happen. Can somebody give me a napkin? Sorry. It's like following the iPad too. Right? If we, as a community, are able to look at logical fallacies and utilize the mind to say this is incorrect, that'll be the first step. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout the Quran always tells us what? To think, to ponder, to use our minds. Right? So that's something to keep in mind. Now, the point I wanted to say, and then I'll end off on it. Thank you. You know, subhanAllah, we were just talking about that, or something has never happened. I think from every lecture, I've never, ever spilled water, right? Like I always check on it. It's indicative, right? That just because something has never happened doesn't mean it won't happen. Just because you have not experienced something, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Actually, if you think about it, in the West too, like it comes from a very hard sense of arrogance that because I have not seen it, I have not heard it, I have not experienced it, it doesn't exist to me. Right? It's actually from a place of arrogance. But when we begin to believe, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to do what? To humble ourselves before we start believing. Right? So what we need to start doing is beginning to question and learning what is a good methodology to follow when it comes to questioning our beliefs. Why is it that people walk away from Islam? Often it's because of an emotional reason or intellectual reason. If it's an emotional reason, then you work with that person one-on-one, and it's a lot easier to kind of help that person come back or yourself to come back. And number two, if it's an intellectual reason, then you have to look at questions and their assumptions, right? For example, you know, like when people say not all Muslims are terrorists, right? Not all Muslims are terrorists. What is the assumption? Yeah, not all Muslims are terrorists, meaning what? That at this point, then a lot or some Muslims are terrorists, right? You can have either way. For example, right? Somebody looks at a Muslim and they ask, did you stop beating your wife? Right? If you say, yes, I stopped, that means what? You were a wife beater. If you say no, right? That means what? That there's still an assumption that you were at some point. But then you need to take a step back. If I ask a 19-year-old YM kid, have you stopped beating your wife? The assumption is what? That they're married. But if they're not married and they're single, does the argument not fall on its face? It does, right? It doesn't make any sense. Similarly, that's what it has to come down to. It comes down to understanding your faith as a personal characterization, as something that me and you utilize to come closer to God. And finally, at the end, is using it to dispel assumptions around the world, or around us about the world that we have. So those are just some of the topics, inshallah, that I hope to cover tomorrow. We'll be talking about even things of like the problem of evil. If God is all good, then why is there evil? Or if something bad happened to me, how is there a God? Or things of that nature that, so-and-so said X, Y, and Z on YouTube, so Islam is false. There's always underlying assumptions you need to question, but every assumption begins with questioning, how did your mind conclude that what it is that you believe is actually true? So inshallah, I'll stop off on that, and then me and Samir will get into some of a conversation, and then from there we'll get into an open Q&A with the audience.
I guess my first question is a personal one for you. How did your faith personally become strengthened with conviction? You mentioned, worship the verse, worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until you reach certainty. So how did you come to that? What were some key pivotal moments in your life?
Starting off with the heart with the big ones. I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind, right? Is that when we begin to study and understand our faith, there's a reason behind it, right? Now, for me as a human being, there's a motive, right? And those motives are what? That we want to actually connect ourselves to the most truthful things in life. Like, what is the bottom line? That's what I need to understand. Many times folks will go through things and you find surface level ideas, or people preaching and the ideas don't make any sense and you can't connect back to them. I think that when one of my teachers had taught me, for example, he says, and again, this comes down to, I think, years of learning faith in a way, which was like being told that Islam is true because Islam said it's true. So does that make any sense, actually? It doesn't. I don't believe in Islam, and you're going to tell me it's true because it said it's true. Like, I have nothing to talk to you about. The Quran said it's true because Allah said it's true in the Quran. Again, does that make any sense? So I think that's what I would identify as many of us are in a space of just believing hard as opposed to believing smart. Right? You're forcing yourself to believe something, not that Islam is false, but the way you're reasoning to it is very sloppy. I think Hafiz Umar has taught everybody in this room, I think. So keeping all that in mind, I think it's coming to a place of realizing that if I am having doubts in my faith, does it come from a place of emotion or does it come from a place of intellect? I think personally for me, I never really had an intellectual dilemma. I'm sorry, an emotional dilemma. I think often it came down to how do I make sense of the world around me? So when it came to actually like the last couple of years, I had a chance to study with some teachers who basically went over a 1,000-year-old tradition of seeing how you can use logic to deduce the fact that God exists. So for example, me and you, if we want to have a debate, what is it that you do to have a debate? You need to have some common ground, right? So like premise number one, premise number two, conclusion, right? So we keep going until we find a disagreement, right? Let's say that, the entire world or the whole universe is contingent, right? What does that mean? I'll explain it in a minute, right? And every single contingent thing has a cause. Contingent means what? That it's dependent. It's dependent. That's what it basically means. The entire universe is dependent. And everything that is dependent has a beginning. So the universe has a beginning, right? So we start there. Imam al-Ghazali radiyallahu anhu, rahimahullah, he and his literature and his scholarship, we're all familiar with Imam al-Ghazali. Actually, I remember, I think in 2003, 4, we actually studied Imam al-Ghazali's book, Ayyuha al-Walad, remember in YM some years ago? Right? Like it was just talking about the tarbiyah that a father gives to his son and whatnot. But Imam Ghazali, he went through his own spiritual dilemma, where he studied for many years, walked away from everything that he had studied, realized that this is not the space that he wants to be in, and finally made it a point to re-understand what it is that he knew. But his scholarship goes over this idea of how do you actually logically reason to that. So, okay, you've established that the universe has a creator. Okay, what are the attributes of this creator? Right, so the creator has to have life, haya. The creator has to have quwwa or qudra, rather. They have to be able to do something. And the creator has to be able to make a choice. The creator has to be able to do all these things, right, that they'll reason say these are the bare minimums. And by the way, we haven't even concluded that it's Allah. We're just saying that if there is a creator, these are the things that this creator needs, right? If there is no life and that creator is dead, well, if there's no life associated to it, then okay, then the universe will cease to exist. The creator has to be able to make a choice. But to be able to make a choice, you have to have what? The ability to make a choice. Like, for example, if you live under your mom and dad's roof and you want to Amazon Prime something every single day, and they're like, no, you can't, and they block you out of their Amazon account, do you actually have the ability or the power to now override their choice? You don't. Similarly, when Allah decides something, I don't have the power to override it. Right, so there's certain traits, and it actually goes on. It's a full science. Okay, so this being has to have these things. Okay, does this being? How does this being exist? For example, Christians will say that God is made up of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Okay, so God, they call him murakkab. God is made up of different like composite parts. Okay, so God's like a Lego block. Well, for me as a Muslim, I don't believe that. Okay, well, let's take a step back. Let's reason. Like, you know, and for all of you like younger guys, the one thing which I think has really proliferated into the Muslim community is like these weird people that give dawah on YouTube, right? Or dawah on YouTube, and they're just yelling at the top of their breath, often in a British accent, right? Or in an Australian accent, right? And like everyone's like, whoa, wow, this is such a great lecture. But that's where you as a young person, you as a halaqah leader need to be smart and say, is this actually what my faith, number one, teaches? And number two, is this something logical that I can bring into a classroom and teach people with? Right? Like, would you want this person at your house having like chai with your family, teaching them Islam? Yeah, exactly. Right? That's what it comes down to, is also understanding like who are you taking from? But I think it comes down to learning how to reason. It sounds like very easy, but like I'm thinking about growing up, and I don't think I really believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala properly. I don't think I really believed that there's an akhirah up until like a few years ago. Like I thought I did, but then when you actually study aqidah, when you actually study like how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ought to exist in this world, only then are we able to really conclude that this is what 100% certainty looks like.
Okay, that was a lot to unpack, but you mentioned a lot of concept like using logic and reasoning. So I'm sure you'll probably go into more of that tomorrow in your class, right? Speaking of contingency, when your water bottle spilled, right? Someone must have caused it to spill, right? So there's I guess you mentioned YouTube personalities and whatnot. Like, how would you combat that? Because that is the norm today. It's not even YouTube. The norm now is like 10-second TikTok sound bites. And the norm is even that Muslim men are basically looking to very emotional non-Muslim leaders or pseudo-intellectuals. I don't even want to mention their name here, but I feel like the audience knows who I'm talking about. You have a lot of young Muslim men following those people. How would you combat that? How would you challenge that?
There's only one. I thought it's like the entirety of the Instagram Reel section.
Let me clarify. In the past couple of weeks, there's been one that's been dominating the social media conversation.
No, I understand, right? But like, I think at the end, what it comes down to is there's a lot of people that have come and gone, right? And ask yourself this: are you looking to take your faith, the most personal, the most vulnerable aspect of your life, from people who they themselves don't really care about your faith? That's the first question that I have, right? Like their popularity increases the number of dollars in their pockets, right? And that popularity is good for them when they instigate things, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, right? It may be something fun to laugh at, but the things that we consume, and I say this like holistically right now, that when you're on Instagram scrolling, when you're on Facebook scrolling, all those things, that's what you're intaking, right? So for example, right, when you're talking about the water bottle, I feel like, this example was interesting, right? That this was caused by what? My hand, I slapped it and the water bottle fell, and then the water came out of it, right? Did I choose to do that? Right? You may think it's like a publicity stunt. No, I didn't. Right? I didn't choose to do that. So does that mean my hand chose to do that? Does my hand have choice? Right? My hand's not a living being. Does my hand have intellect? Does hand have intellect? No, it doesn't. So automatically, what does it go back to? Either you have to ask yourself, yeah, this doesn't give it, this is you still moving your fingers, right? But the idea is that what? Okay, so if your hand didn't do it, then what caused the water to fall, right? Someone must have decided that it's going to fall, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided that. It's as simple. Allah is allowing me to speak. Allah is allowing you to sit, right? So that said, I think what it comes down to is when our communities are consuming, like if you live in the middle of nowhere and that's the only thing that you consume, fine. Inshallah, somebody has to work with you. But if you have a healthy Muslim community, you have people to go to, people to reach out to, I don't think it's an excuse, right? And I think also people, like I said, they have to find themselves in a position to be able to really inquire that what I believe, is it really true? And does it make sense? And how can I move forward with it? Like, it's about taking personal responsibility.
Okay. Jazakallah for that answer. So what you're basically saying is that if you have the local resources, you should take advantage of those first because they actually have your genuine best interest at heart, right? As opposed to a YouTube celebrity or someone on TikTok where their views and their popularity are essentially incentivized by money and the outrageous things that they're saying. So it's an element of sincerity that you'll get with your local imams and your local shuyukh. You mentioned, for me, I don't think that we're really taught how to reason, proof that God exists. So to me, even hearing you say that, I've learned that in school or in college maybe, or I've learned that through online lectures. So that's a very foreign concept to me. But I want to talk about a little bit of the emotional aspect. In your experience, and I'll talk about my experience, what are the emotional reasons for someone to leave Islam or doubt the faith? What are some of the top reasons?
So I think many of us, it comes down to this. Is Islam a fact, right? What is a fact? Can somebody Google it real quick. What is a fact? What is a fact? A what? No, but what is a fact? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying F-A-C-T, the word fact. What is that? What were you saying? Something that is known or proven, right, to be true. So meaning what? When we say it's a fact, right, as a matter of a fact, that means what? That you cannot deny it, right? So the first question is Islam a fact in your life? Or is it just a cultural preference, right? And I say this because we live in a time where we want to have a third Eid Salah because Miss Marvel was revealed. We're like, yes, we get a Muslim superhero, right? And it sounds funny, right? But we're so excited at the fact that we get cultural representation. And I'm not saying that's not important, but think about this. In so many different places, even in India, where people get so happy that we have Muslim actors and actresses and singers, but does that actually do anything for Islam? Does that actually do anything for Muslims? Muslims are being slaughtered left and right in India, right? And you have all these Muslim celebrities and influencers with their mouths shut. So what does it do? In my opinion, they don't believe Islam is a fact. They just see it as a cultural preference. So you have somebody that goes and lives their entire life inherently, implicitly. They never said that I believe Islam is a cultural preference, but deep down inside, it wasn't something they questioned, and because their mother and father gave that to them as a faith, they didn't have a reason to maybe accept it or reject it, but they begin to drift away from it. So, in my opinion, that ends up becoming what? They haven't really engaged with it, and then when they start engaging, they start pushing it away. An emotional reason for somebody to go away from their faith, I think we all can name something. What's an emotional reason for somebody to leave Islam? What are some of the reasons you've heard? Yeah. Yeah. So mistreatment, say somebody didn't pray Salah or somebody didn't read the Quran, they get mistreated. They get verbally or physically or sexually abused. Things, all sorts of things happen, right? Or at the same time, let's say you had a bad experience with somebody that may lay claim to their faith. Or take it even more. Look, ISIS, right? Some of these same individuals say, look, ISIS are the real Muslims because they do what it says in the Quran. Right? Okay, well, if that's the case, you've misunderstood the Quran, and at the same time, you're just using emotion to push people away from their faith. Right? When politicians get up and talk bad about Islam, are they actually appealing to intellect, or are they appealing to emotion? Right? Right? Until when in 2016, when Donald Trump is like, we need to ban Muslims coming into America until we can figure out whatever is going on. Was that an appeal to reason, or is that an appeal to emotion? Right? Everything, like you all know about these instances. It all comes down to it. Is it an appeal to emotion, or is it an appeal to intellect? If it's an appeal to intellect, great, let's have a conversation. But a lot of folks who often push back against naming the name of Islam do so through emotion because they don't have the ability to do it through intellect. Right? And even a lot of times, the few arguments people will make about some weird, trendy idea that actually has nothing to do with Islam, they often do it through emotion. And when you involve intellect into it, what's the first thing they say? Oh, you're arguing. Oh, you're being disrespectful. Well, if you can't handle criticism of the things that you believe, is your belief any good?
Okay, so I was going to mention that in my experience, when I've taught at Islamic schools, when I was an Islamic studies teacher, the emotional reasons that kids have, I think the number one reason is that they've been abused in some way, and that there's hypocrisy, meaning that their parents want them to do one thing, but it's not something that's actually enforced at home. And that leads to a lot of resentment, a lot of hatred. That's what I was going to mention. So we talked about some of the problems, like how would you go, like, not that we're going to solve this tonight, right? But what are some things we can do to address these emotional issues, like this turbulence that's being caused?
So trauma is always multifaceted. Trauma can be generational, trauma can be communal, trauma can be individual. It comes to a point in life where you go through stages of grief, right? I was a hospital chaplain as well for some time. And grief has stages, and grief often begins with disbelief, that you cannot, for example, comprehend that something bad happened, right? Whether that's a relationship ending, whether that's a person passing away, whether that's you having your dreams shattered, it starts there. And then it morphs into different phases. Some of that phase is blame, and that maybe goes to self-blame, and then it blames others. But, and I'm actually gonna kind of deviate a little bit from this idea. You often hear people say that if Allah exists and Islam is true, why do bad things happen? Right? But there is an underlying assumption when somebody says something like that, which is what? That bad should never happen. Right? But is that logical? Should bad never happen? Right? Should there be a world in which bad should, never will occur? Well, let me ask you this: is there a world in which bad will never occur? There is. It's called the akhirah. It's called the hereafter. If I truly believe in that idea, then understanding the disparity of good and evil in this world makes more sense. Number two is, if I find something to be bad, if I say this thing is bad, is that necessarily bad? Or if this thing is good, is that necessarily good? No. Allah tells us in the Quran, "Asa an takrahu shay'an fahuwa khayrun lakum." That perhaps there's something that you dislike, but it's good for you. On the most minimal aspect, right? 5-year-old kid says, "Mommy, I want to eat 17 cookies from Insomnia Cookies tonight." Right? Or even better, say not you're 5, say you're 15, right? And you, as a YM TNEC unit, made a terrible decision to go to Insomnia Cookies for dinner, not even for dessert. And you're going to eat 15 cookies. In the morning, you're going to have a stomachache. And somebody stops you guys, you shouldn't do this. And you'll say, because you did not let me indulge in my choice, you are bad. My decision is good. Is that like intrinsically good and bad there? No, it's not. Actually, everyone's probably going to thank you 10 years later when your glucose levels are shooting through the roof because you made that bad decision. Right? So good and bad, how we perceive it is subjective. But what good and bad is defined as by Allah and by the Quran is not subjective. So perhaps there's something I may think is good, but it's actually bad, and there may be something I think is bad, and I think it's good. Right? Or it's actually good. So that's one aspect. Now, the other aspect of your question about people getting through that emotional trauma that may exist there, as I mentioned, is that once I am able to work through that difficulty, I need to reassess the fact as to where does my faith come from? Where do I derive that value from? And yes, it's interesting that people say this about faith, right? Like, you did your taxes and an accountant cheats you and swindles you from a lot of money. Like, nobody sits there and says all accountants are bad. But yet, for some reason, somebody who happens to lay claim to being a good Muslim has their own demons and does something that bothers you or troubles you or harms you. Does it again, emotion and logic aside, does it logically make sense to hold the idea that everyone associated or that practices their faith or doesn't practice their faith is an evil person? No. Right? When we begin to use our minds, the verses Hafiz Ahmad's your name? Ahmar, okay. Recite, did you do your hifz here in Dar al-Islam? How many of you did your hifz in Dar al-Islam? Raise your hands. Raise your hands. No, not you, Obama. Yeah. No, not like this. I don't, raise your hands high. Right. All right, now, Obama, let me ask you this. Could you have imagined 10 years ago that there would be a full-time hifz school Dar al-Islam? No. Right? So when we talk about, like I was talking about community before, to get to where we are, and to get to where it is that we want to go, the planning has to start now. So Samir, your question is that how do we get people to actually learn to reason for the fact that God exists? It's going to start now. How do we work as a community to bring about change? When I went to go do my hifz in like 2004, my parents wanted to keep me local, right? And at that time, there was nothing. There was nothing in 2004. Neither was there Sawt al-Furqan and Nida al-Islam, neither was there Dar al-Islam. I went all the way to Jamaica, Queens for several years. Then when Nida al-Islam started, we came back here. But at the end, guess what? The brainchild of having Sheikh Walid here, of having Sheikh Shireen here, of having a full-time hifz school, the planning of it started when they said we want to build a school here. How much time did that take? How much fundraising did that take? How many people saying it's a terrible idea did it take? How many people saying it's a great idea it's going to take? And through the blessings and the work of those people, we have individuals that are sitting here who've memorized the Quran in this place under auspicious teachers. It took the vision of Imam Sayyid Qureshi. Many of you, he's not here, right? Many of you, completely underestimate Imam Sayyid Qureshi. Like, even on the website, right? I think we should fix it. It says Hafiz Sayyid Qureshi. He's actually like a scholar of Islamic law. He practiced law in Pakistan, and he's an excellent teacher. But he had a vision. He doesn't sit there and he doesn't put it on YouTube. He doesn't sit there and yap about it everywhere. And people that have visions, they don't talk about it. They implement. Right? Dr. Shujat Hussain, when he was the president, he had a vision. Rahimahullah. Mazhar uncle, is he here? Is Mazhar uncle here? Well, Athar uncle's here, so he represents Mazhar uncle, right? So that's good, right? When Mazhar uncle had a vision, right? People had visions to lead up to this point, right? If we're just going to sit there and complain and not plant seeds, then nothing's ever going to get done. That's why the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he said, if the day of judgment is happening in front of you, the sky is being destroyed. إِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ وَإِذَا النُّجُومُ انْكَدَرَتْ وَإِذَا الْجِبَالُ سُيِّرَتْ. The mountains are exploding. The sky is rolling up. And you have a seed in your hand. The Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, plant the seed. Why? Because do not just be result-oriented, but rather be somebody that is oriented around methodology and process. You may not be around to see the fruit of that, but somebody else will benefit from that. And as a Muslim, that's what it means, is to pass the baton ahead. Muhammad al-Sharif, he just passed away, rahimahullah, right? He had this idea of doing these weekend seminars, right? He was a graduate of Medina University, right? And people said, oh, this idea of Islam, learning on the weekend, etc., not such a great idea. I don't know how it's going to work. He just passed away at the age of 47. And he leaves behind a legacy of teaching close to 100,000 students very in-depth Islamic subjects. It takes time, it takes effort. Are we teaching the idea of reasoning to God to students who are taking philosophy and biology and science in like Sunday school? Are we able to expand our evening programs to include not just like ta'lim al-haq, right? Like you have these books that taught beliefs, but we are now beyond ta'lim al-haq. We are now beyond bihishti zewar. We are beyond a lot of these books that don't take into account the difficulties that people are facing today. That's why this course that I'm teaching, or at least just a part of it, it's actually like an 8 or 9 hour course, but I'm only just doing 4 hours just to give you an idea and a taste of it. When we begin to understand the challenges around us and then respond to them accordingly, then we'll find success in the years to come. So Sheikh Hamza Karam Ali, I have a podcast, it's called Faith in Fine Print. So I recently interviewed him. If you're interested to see some of the subject matter, you can listen to it either on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you can find a podcast or on YouTube. But we actually spoke about like how people don't think of truth to be objective. What does that mean? The truth is one. It's not my truth and his truth and your truth. No, truth is one. You may have a different experience, your experience, my experience, but experience does not represent truth, logically speaking. Logically speaking. If one person came to Darul Islah, had a bad experience 10 years ago, 15 years ago, yes, I can give you emotion. Yes, I can give you comfort. Yes, I can give you empathy. But what about after that? What about after that? You know, right now, a lot of psychological studies are talking about how too much affirmation of people is actually leading them to engage in more behaviors that are not appropriate of the circumstances that they originally came in for. Right? You ever meet people, they're just sulking in sadness. They choose not to get better, even though they have the ability to do so. That's not what our faith teaches us. You take time, you heal, you get up, you move forward. ألم نشرح لك صدرك ووضعنا عنك وزرك الذي أنقض ظهرك ورفعنا لك ذكرك فإن مع العسر يسرا إن مع العسر يسرا. You're going through a tough time, know that ease will come after hardship. He says that twice. وإلى ربك فإذا فرغت فانصب. When you've kind of taken that time you need to heal, when you've taken that time away from the world and you can now grow, وإلى ربك فارغب, then recommit yourself to your Lord. It's a process, it starts now.
Jazakallah khair. I feel that we need to do a better job acknowledging some of the emotional traumas that happen here. But what Nihal is saying is that we all also need to take personal responsibility. So what do you do next? Yes, okay, this bad thing happened to you from so-and-so, but now what happens in the future is your responsibility. You have to take control. I'd like to start asking some of the questions from the audience. A lot of questions rolled in. Inshallah, if we don't get to them, maybe I can pass them to you. You can answer them tomorrow. But, oh yeah, you can see. Let me ask you one, and then I'll pass the phone after that. So, if God is all-powerful and has control, isn't He the one making me not believe? That's the question.
If God is all-powerful and He is in all control, is He not the one that is making me not believe? So, coming back to a couple of things to keep in mind. Again, what are the assumptions that we have about the world around us? We're now assuming then that we have no disposition to do anything. Right? So with that question, there's an assumption that I myself have no ability to do anything, and God is just making everything happen. One time a man came to Ali radiallahu anhu, and this actually goes down to another question, understanding free will and predestination. This is a question that has been asked from the beginning era of after the death of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You had groups such as the Jabariya, you had groups such as the Qadariya. One group which basically said that it doesn't matter what we do, God is in control. Good and bad doesn't matter. I can hit you. I have no personal responsibility for what I inflict on you because that's what God wanted. Versus those that say that Allah has no hand whatsoever in this world. He kind of created it and is letting it run free. So keeping this in mind is that we live in a way in which Allah has granted us free will, but at the same time there is predestination. How do I understand that? Ali radiallahu anhu, a man came to him and asked him that, هل الإنسان مخير أم مقدر? That is mankind, do I have the choice to do whatever it is that I want to do? Mukhayyar, can I make choices from ikhtiyar? Or is it muqaddar? Is it already predetermined? He said, well, let's do this, right? Stand up, he stands up, okay? He stands up. And he tells him, lift one leg, so he lifts one leg. He goes, now pick up your other leg. Am I not lifting this leg by free will? Am I, even if I will it, am I able to pick this leg up? I'm willing it, right? So why is it that God is allowing me to pick up this leg and not allowing me to pick up this one? Because I live between free will, but I also live between predestination. Right? Wherein, what is that? That means that Allah has the entire picture and I have the pixel. In the Quran, for example, Allah says, خَتَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبِهِمْ وَعَلَىٰ سَمْعِهِمْ وَعَلَىٰ أَبْصَارِهِمْ غِشَاوَةً. Right? That indeed we have sealed off their hearts and their sight and their عَلَىٰ قُلُوبِهِمْ وَعَلَىٰ سَمْعِهِمْ, upon their ears, وَعَلَىٰ أَبْصَارِهِمْ, and upon their eyes, to believe. So the question goes back. Okay, well, if Allah doesn't want these people to believe, how are they ever going to believe? Again, what's the underlying assumption? If you take nothing away from tonight or come tomorrow, take away this. Ask yourself, what is the underlying assumption of the question? So for this question, it comes down to this, is that if I exist in a space that I am looking for belief, I am looking for guidance, then yes, Allah will allow that to happen. Right? Allah has knowledge of everything, of all possibilities. But Allah's knowledge of all the possibilities doesn't mean that you get to not discover what that possibility is. Right? Allah has the picture, we have the pixel.
You want to look at some of these? I'll ask you one that was asked early on, that in Islam that there are various schools of thought, like Hanafi, Shafi. How do you differentiate and like what would be the truth, or when there's so many varying opinions in Islam when it comes to both aqidah and fiqh? So like in Islam, there are various schools of thoughts, and there are differences of opinion in fiqh and aqidah. So how do you make sense of what is true and what is not true when there's so many varying opinions?
So there's two things to keep in mind, right? We as human beings do one of two things. We either individually investigate something, or number two, we follow it, what we would call blindly. So either you do bahath, you investigate things as you need to, or you do taqleed is what they'd call. Taqleed is something where you follow something or someone because you completely don't understand it, right? For example, we drive cars. How many of you are mechanics here? So all of you do taqleed of your car. Do you understand how your car works? Do you understand how big an engine goes into your car? Do you think a 6.8 Hemi can go into a Honda Accord? Do you think that your 21-inch wheels can be fit on your 1994 Honda Accord? Probably not. But see, we don't understand the mechanics, yet we trust it to do what? To drive. You don't understand how a plane works, yet you blindly follow a pilot to drive. Or to fly, right? Blind following to a certain extent is allowed within Islamic law. It's not an issue, right? Because not everyone's going to understand the proofs. Blind following within Aqidah, if you have the ability to investigate, right? You have the ability to search and you choose not to, actually makes one sinful, right? Imam Ghazali, other folks have spoken, Imam Juwaini have said that if you have the ability to investigate whether your beliefs are correct and you choose not to, then that makes you sinful. Now, you're sitting here in a masjid, you pray 5 times a day, you're a hafiz of the Quran, right? You're learning Arabic. it is most definitely, if not a fard upon you, to come and investigate the truths of what it is that you believe in. But for example, if you're somebody that doesn't know anything, all you do is you read the Quran, you know your basic obligations, and there's nothing directly challenging your belief. Like you're not affected by it. Like the woman that came to Fakhruddin al-Razi, like it's like, oh, okay, 1,000 proofs. Well, you must have had 1,000 doubts, right? And there was a scholar. He basically said that a time will come where an old woman's faith will be the best thing to have. Why? Because she's not constantly challenged. And a lot of our parents, if they don't come from a generation in which their beliefs are constantly challenged, that's on us, right? Like even as a parent, when you see and you hear your child questioning and challenging things, you yourself may not feel challenged, right? Like I know, like my father's in his 60s, and if he hears like somebody like a young person at the message saying that, he himself probably won't feel challenged, but will be concerned for that young person to arrive to the conclusion that Islam is true. But that's going to have to be their own struggle.
I did forget to ask the second part of the question, but I'm guessing I know the answer, but you can go ahead. Are all of the sects considered to be the correct interpretations of the Prophet's teachings, or is there only one acceptable school of thought?
So again, within like the schools of law, there's schools of aqidah, right, in which they'll differentiate over the minutiae of things. So generally speaking, yes, they are within a certain degree correct. And if you don't understand the intricacies of it, follow a scholar that you trust, and follow a scholar that if you speak to them, they make sense, you feel comfortable, then follow that person. So yes.
I think the beauty of these schools of thoughts is that there's a consistent methodology which these schools and these imams and these shuyukh apply to their understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah. Methodology is just something that's lost. Like people just don't have a standard ruler that they use to judge anything by today. So it's all chaotic. And actually, if you go back and you study these proofs and these evidences, you'll see a lot of it is based on logic, and there's consistency applied throughout. So inshallah, all of that is correct and true. Sure.
There's another thing that a lot of people fear. They think that if we start comparing rational proofs or we start examining scientific proofs of things in Islam, that there's maybe we'll maybe find a contradiction between Islam and some of these other things. But the truth of it is that you will not find a contradiction between what Islam preaches and what something logical is. What you will find often is that if the two things are not able to be reconciled, you will find, if you look hard enough, that those ideas that are present within that system of thinking may be incorrect, right? I'll say something, right? And it's okay, like, I think we live in a time where we have to address it, right? For me as a Muslim, same-sex marriage is something that is not allowed, right? This is something that's not allowed. Are we not living at a time period where the logic of arguing against that is called illogical? Are we not saying that, oh, well, science backs this? Well, what's the philosophy of the science that we're utilizing to come to that conclusion? All of these subjects, like I'm saying, philosophy, this and that, well, those are the underlying assumptions that are present in those arguments. Like I just told you, when a textbook tells you that the entirety of the universe is created of matter and the universe has nothing to do with God, the assumption is that what? God either doesn't exist or God is matter, right? But Allah is not, any of those things. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Allah does not, it has no likeness and no bearing to likeness to anything. So it's easy to sit there and say, brother, we have to talk about this issue and that issue. But if we haven't actually placed like for you to get to med school, you start where? You start at kindergarten, you start at preschool. Like we can't sit there and say Islam's response is X, Y, and Z to this if you actually haven't understood what Islam is, right? If you haven't actually proven the fact that the basic underlying ideas of Islam and the existence of God first have to be met before you go and challenge those ideas. That's why you'll often see, right? Coming back to the Muslim YouTubers. How many of you know a Muslim YouTuber that's left Islam? There you go. What's the problem there? Often you'll see that when you're just becoming responsive, when you're only way to engage with the community or the issues of the community is to be responsive, and you don't actually take a step back and come from a place of methodology, you're standing on very shallow ground, and that's what's going to lead to a difficult disposition if you're trying to actually create a community. I know we're fielding a lot of questions from the text or whatnot, but if somebody has an actual question that they want to ask or a comment, they're more than welcome to. Yes, go ahead. So what are we doing to benefit the generations after us? I don't know. I don't live here anymore. Right? Well, I can't talk about the future, but what I can do is talk about the past, right? You see a lot of young people that are here, some of them that are involved in MSAs, some of them that are leading Taraweeh throughout the state, right? People that are catering to it. And not only that, Darlos, you got to give this some credit. Tell me another HIF school in all of New York and all of New Jersey that you have a girls' HIF school, right? Anybody know what the plural of a girl hafiz is? Hafizat. Somebody had once posed that question from this exact microphone 10 years ago or so, a speaker. And he asked the sisters that, what is the plural of a hafizat? They didn't know because we had no culture of females memorizing the Quran. Darls has a lot to be proud of just for that reason. Now, where is the community going? I don't know, but what I see is that it's definitely at a good place as to where it was 10 years ago. So I think it's subjective. I mean, I think a lot of times when we think what are we doing? How is the community growing? The question to ask is, what is the work that we are doing that is unannounced, right? I think that's what we need to take a look at. How is there a shift within the dialogue of the way we interact with each other in the community? I think that's where the litmus test lies. Well, I don't know if you know, Darlos actually has a young man in the committee. Yeah. But so here's another thing, right? I think young people and old people, I take issue with this personally, right? Where and I think this is the mistake that we as young people have made. We're elders don't know anything. It's all about the youth. But no, as a community, we're not ageist. We don't push back and say, you're old, so you don't make sense. No. Actually, if you're old, the Prophet said, whosoever doesn't show reverence to our elders, but also does not invite the young and show the young respect, is not from us. Right? So I think it's about communicating and understanding that each group has needs. Right? That senior citizens have. I don't know if this effort still is there, but I remember 10, 15 years ago when my family still lived here, we had not me, but there was a senior citizens weekly meeting, right? There are a lot of old people in the community who don't have family, who don't have, spicy programming to bring them to the masjid, but they're just looking for somebody to talk to. And often those people are the butt of jokes within our community. We just sit there oh yeah, that guy is just at the masjid, he just talks and talks and talks. But that's because that person has nobody to talk to. Okay, so elders have needs. Parents who may be in their 50s and 60s, their kids are graduating, they're downsizing their houses, have certain needs. Post-college young professionals have needs. I started a program called Quran for Professionals, which is if you go to QuranForProfessionals.com, you can read about it, because there was a huge gap between post-college young professionals being able to learn to recite the Quran, right? Because nobody wants to come and sit in the 4 to 7 o'clock evening maktab to go alif zabar ba zabar ba ta, right? You don't want to do that. It's embarrassing. So I created a space for, right now we have 23 students to within 4 months learn how to read the Quran, and then after 8 months you get into memorizing. So everyone has needs. Okay, so you have that group. Then you also have the group of college age and high school age youth. Not only that, you have guys have different needs and girls have different needs and growth. There's actually a really good book series I'd recommend. My wife just finished reading this by Dr. Leonard Sachs. Boys Adrift is called one, and the other one is called Girls Adrift, Girls Afloat. But they're both by Dr. Leonard Sachs, and he talks about how within the educational needs of men and women, they need to be catered to as well. Like for me, in my opinion, the masjid is a place of pedagogy. It's a place of teaching people according to where they are. Imam al-Bukhari, one of the chapter titles that he has, Kitab al-Ilm, in the book of knowledge, is تَعَلَّمُ النَّاسَ عَلَى قَدْرِ عُقُولِهِمْ, that teach people according to their ability to comprehend what it is that you're teaching them. So going down to it, young kids, babies have needs, right? And then that's where you come down to it. I don't think it's a one size fits all, but it's a good catchphrase. Like I think I kind of coined this, right? How many of you YM guys have heard the term "mashallah" the youth, right? I used to say that because I used to hear them say, "Oh, the youth are the future" or whatever. No, the youth are the now. The middle-aged are the now, right? The toddlers are the now. We're all equal in that sense, and we all have needs, and we should not sit there and cater to one group over the other. When we begin to realize that the elder that is doing his or her best to learn their faith has as much emotion and is as human as you as a young person who just wants to have the fanciest of fanciest programs with the nicest, speakers, they also need to learn their faith, and that may not be the way that they're going to learn their faith. I think it's not a one-size-fits-all.
I would say, though, that there is a specific generation that's missing. And I think the fact that we're having this conversation is a healthy first step to addressing that problem. And we should be reaching out to those people that aren't here and asking them, what will it take for you to come to the masjid? How can we bring you back in? How can we cater to your needs? One of the things that just popped in my head is, you could offer babysitting during an event or something like that to make it advantageous for parents to come and get a break. That's just one example. So, inshallah, we are going to continue the Q&A after Maghrib for a little bit. I'm going to call Al-Bab up here to make the adhan. And inshallah, we'll pray Maghrib, and then we will come back to Q&A. Yeah, so please keep sending your questions in. We'll do our best to answer them. If not, then inshallah Nihal will try his best to answer them tomorrow during his class.
So in case for anybody that leaves, but the class is tomorrow at 9 a.m. until 1 p.m. I think it's going to be right here, I assume, or in the expansion? In the expansion area. So you can bring a pen and paper if you want. I'll just be going through certain sections of it. So the book, actually, I brought it with me. It's not available completely, but it's literally called Why Islam is True, right? And it just talks about how do you reason to the fact that Islam is true. And you can get it at, actually it's not available, but you can read about, it's an actual course taught by Basira Education. You can either look up Basira Education, or you can go to whyislamistrue.com. So that's where that basically is. And yeah, I'm here after Maghrib, so if anybody wants to speak, then they can. But be proud of where you are as a community, but also understand there's always room for growth, and that's what we're looking to do, inshallah.
You guys can use this opportunity if you need to make wudu. Otherwise, the brothers, sisters can go downstairs while the adhan is being called, while the brothers get ready to pray up here, inshallah. Yeah, as Brother Samir mentioned, we'll continue for about 10 to 15 more minutes after Maghrib with Q&A, and then we'll have dinner after that, inshallah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. أشهد أن لا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح.